introduction, first share his bio, but also I have been working with Nature for 2 years now, and it's been such a pleasure and honor to be able to work with Victor. He is truly a gem in the community, and especially in the Congress Heights community, where he's able to use his background and experience to share more information about flooding, flood impact, and be able to engage with community members on issues that in a way that they're able to understand it and want to dive deeper into it, both in advocacy and outreach and overall in their everyday lives. So thank you for so much work that you've been able to do with us. We're a water watcher, a lot of our successful programming. He has been there. He has been super supportive, and we're so proud to have somebody and an ally from Department of Energy and Environment with us at Nature Forward. So his bio, Victor is a certified floodplain manager for DC's Department of Environment, Energy and Environment. He began at floodplain management 5 years ago at Baltimore City's Community Rating System program. Victor attended Morgan State University, an historically Black college, and an undergraduate in biological sciences department. It was during these years his social consciousness evolved on campus, but also off campus for the environment. As he canvassed for local environmental organizations in later years, he earned a master's in environmental science at California State University, Los Angeles. He has experience working in several corners of the environmental profession, including advocacy and organizing. Over the years, Victor has also worked as a risk assessor and recycling specialist with the former Chesapeake Bay Program Citizens Advisory Committee member for the state of Maryland, where in 2014, he led the advocacy to adopt certain diversity and environmental justice language into the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Agreement. Victor's current and most rewarding role is being a father, husband, and steward in his own community. So please welcome him with a full round of applause as he's ready for the game to know wonderful cafe.
Thank you. So yeah, that was a great introduction, Jelani. And I don't know if you can tell from the spirit of her introduction, we have a lot of fun together doing work that we are both very passionate about. And you know, I'm kind of getting a little long in the tooth myself. You know, I remember when I started as you know, a younger environmental professional, canvassing and doing advocacy work. And so when I think about Jelani and the work that she's doing, you know, it really resonates with me that she can, you know, do what she does and, you know, with and in front of you all and in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So let's give Jelani a round of applause. We're certainly an asset forward. And with that being said, just a little note about Nature Forward. I remember Diane, how long you have been around and working with Nature Forward. But Diane Cameron invested time and energy into me as you know, a growing environmental professional, folks like Andy Fellows, Clean Water Action. And so I just, you know, sort of honor and recognize people who have poured into me and, you know, helped encourage me along the way. But moving forward to today, I am working on behalf of the Department of Energy and Environment. And I'm here today just to share some information and hopefully some good stories about flood risk and what we think engagement is. Okay.
Yes, if it doesn't work, I'll...
Okay. So in doing so, I'll go over a few different topics, and you know, through going through these topics, I would like this to be, you know, a little interactive. I know that I have been placed with the responsibility of doing the speaking, but I want to share a little bit of that with you so that we can share with each other. So you guys can share with one another, but also so that I can learn from you. So that I take away something as well as you take away something. Will that work? Okay, yeah, see, there we go, participation, who said yes, who gave me that? There we go, there we go. So yeah, we'll talk about, recent flooding. And I think, we all should be able to think of some things, maybe in the news. This is, that, remind us of, some recent flooding. This is, we are sort of in the height of, storm season. So this is around the time we'll be seeing flood events, here in the US. But also there's some international events that some of you might mention, or some, global events rather. Talk about what were some causes of flooding. This is where we get into some of the risks and how risk is defined, by the federal government, magnitude, probability. And I think a conversation that you may like, equity. We'll get into equity and, brace yourselves. We may say the word race, and we may say black, we may say white. Since I am the speaker, I am going to take some liberty and set some rules. Rule number one, let's say this is a safe space, right? I am just a person who is offering information based on my experiences and what I have learned, and I'll take you the same way. And when we leave, maybe we can, we'll have learned something if we made an assumption and someone offers some information that addresses that assumption, then it will be better for it, right? So this is a safe space that we talk about, equity, right? Talk about that. And just a quick note, my experience with equity, kind of evolved when I went to California, lived there for a while, was raised in Baltimore City, and okay, all right. We're doing pretty well this year, but I wanted to get to a quick story that I've been dying to share. So I'm not good at basketball, right? But there's stereotypes prevail because we're human, right? So I'm in California, in graduate school, and it's a melting pot, far different from Baltimore City, where it's really black and white, right? That's what I had seen through my 20s. But in LA, this is a melting pot. You get good pho, you get real good burritos and tacos. So my consciousness and my interest in people was just really energized and really came alive in that environment. There's a basketball court at our graduate dorms. And what I noticed was that the different cultures and races would take turns playing basketball. It's almost like some of these jail documentaries that you see. It's interesting, it's fascinating to me, but I didn't play by the rules, and I decided, well, since I look like Michael Jordan, I must be, I can go out there and, they're gonna respect me because, they're gonna think that, I am what a black person is supposed to be on a basketball court. This is what's going on in my mind. So I'm gonna use that to my advantage. And what I learned was that, the sort of these, there were Asian gentlemen, there were Hispanic gentlemen on the court that didn't care about race. They played basketball in such a way that made me sit back and think like, wow, my stereotypes of who I am and who they are is actually putting me at a disadvantage. And so I shared that to say that, we all have opportunities to learn from one another. And this is an opportunity where if we talk about equity and race, let's walk away better from it without any judgment. So I just want to offer that up and make myself vulnerable so that we all can kind of like exist in that same space. So that's just a note on equity. We'll also talk about some of the targeted outreach that we're looking at, and going on into what we think is meaningful engagement, right? Okay. Recent flooding, it's been in the news, happened here in Washington DC. But there's also been some global events. Let's share. What are your recollections of flooding over the last 5 to 10 years? Anybody? Say it. Say it.
Derna in Libya.
And Libya, Durham. Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking. Okay, what are some sort of examples that don't exist in our area? Yes, ma'am.
Well, when I think of DC,
Yeah,
it was, I think of the dogs. And
there should go.
that points out to me that I don't know anything about flooding in DC.
How so?
I was shocked that there was flooding enough
Right.
to kill the dogs. But it could have been a person, and I lived here almost my whole life. And I
Northeast,
didn't tell it was a problem.
yeah, Northeast DC happened almost a month ago. One or two more? Yes, sir.
If I remember right, there was a lot of flooding a couple of years ago. I think it was Ellicott City, September,
Yeah.
Yeah, 2008,
really bad.
like 2018, actually, 2018. One more.
Well, did you see the 2006 floods that flooded
Okay, national one, yeah. Mhm. And some of these flood events, specifically the ones in DC, we'll talk about some more. So ma'am, you mentioned the dogs. It's the 600 block of Rhode Island Avenue. That location, actually flooded, several times over the last, few years. In 2020, you see, this is the structure actually being developed. Yeah. This is 2021, you can see the flooding, I guess it's about 3 feet from the ground. And then, of course, just recently, this is the flooding at that same location. So we know it happens, right? (2020) also in Northeast DC, but another section of Northeast DC, along with Watts Branch. See, this playground is flooded pretty badly. And this woman's house is surrounded by floodwaters. This person's backyard inundated with flooding as well. A lot of this flooding came from the local waterway, Watts Branch. And we'll talk about the different causes of flooding. Here, you see this man who works for one of the businesses down the wharf, still looking to serve the patrons that happen to be there during this 2021. This was I think this was a pretty significant tidal flooding event. I'm pointing out this is tidal flooding as opposed to the last slide where we looked at flooding from a river source, local, like inland river source, Watts Branch. And all along the Potomac waterfront, there were reports of significant tidal flooding. Okay. What are some of the causes of this flooding? So this is a graphic that we like to use when we go to community meetings or we're at festivals, to kind of acknowledge the fact that when people are talking about flooding, they're not always talking about the same thing, right? They're not always exposed to the same experience of flooding. For example, you could be talking to someone who's sharing their experience with flooding due to a broken pipe in their basement, right? And you can't tell someone that that type of flooding is not significant or is not important just because it's not the type of flooding that comes from, sea level rise or a river, a community river or stream that's overflowing into the streets and into someone's home. That is significant, right? Since someone's basement pipe is broken, probably need a plumber to address that. But then also just staying right in this basement. I mean, there's so many different ways water can get into your basement. And you could have heavy rain and sewage back up into your home. I think it was in 2018, maybe. We had that summer where there's a lot of rainfall. They said this was probably the most rainfall we had seen in this area in a long time. And the water, we all knew that the water tables were higher than usual. So this diagram is also acknowledging that, right? So this is a person's basement. A couple of other different ways where water can get into your basement. But let's jump over to riverine flooding. I show the pictures of the Watts Branch or communities around the Watts Branch that have flooded. What about in the winter? Like during the winter, pipes are always, coming apart. These darn water mains, right? Streets flooded. That happens. That is flooding also. So when people are talking to us about flooding, we've had to kind of take a step back and adjust our thinking and say, what kind of flooding are they talking about? How shall we address this? Because it's not all the same, but it's all important to that individual. We kind of went over storm surge and sea level rise. This storm drain diagram indicates what's technically called pluvial flooding, where you get this large amount of rainfall in a short amount of time, the technical term, the cloud burst, and falls in a small area, and the storm drain system just can't manage it. And you have backflow onto streets, right? I mean, flooding is pretty, dynamic in terms of the causes, right? And we use the word sort of generic, right? Tidal flooding, Georgetown waterfront, Butler Point, Haynes Point, Tidal Basin. Just to detail some of the areas that are impacted in DC. So we're talking about the District of Columbia and the characteristics of flooding in the district. Caused by storm surge, wind activity, riverine flooding, Watts Branch, Oxon Run, Anacostia River, Potomac River. Communities around those water bodies are impacted, right? Interior flooding. It's another technical term that describes the pluvial flooding that I was talking about. This has become more and more of a challenge to communities all over the country, including the district, partly because our federal government has really focused on riverine and coastal flooding more than this type of flooding that's not really associated with a natural water body. The two components are rainfall and the man-made drainage system. Those are the two main components. When the system is overwhelmed, this is what you get. This image is from Northeast DC, near the Ivy City community. Again, flooding is dynamic. it's sort of diverse in its types, and we use the term generically. And we talked about the causes that make it so dynamic and different in how it can occur. But another way that makes flooding sort of, really dynamic is that it happens in different sizes, and scientists have estimated that there are different chances or occurrences of certain size flooding happening. And this is how the federal government and community organizations are making plans to prepare for flooding. So this is a diagram. Raise your hand if you've heard of the term 100-year flood. Right. So the person on the news that's reporting on this major flood, and many times you will hear the flood being characterized as a 100-year flood. Sometimes they're correct because they sort of checked in with some of the scientists who have made the calculation and that determination. But a lot of times they're using the term because it's kind of understood that this size flood has not happened before in their recollection. And so it must be that 100-year flood, as if this can only happen every 100 years. I'll get to the question in a second. The term comes from, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and their, hydrologists who actually have sought to sort of explain the probability or the occurrence of a flood of a certain size. You see this line? This gives you a rough area, or this representation of an area that will be covered. Likewise with the 500-year flood, and then the 50, and then the 10-year flood. So it gives you the probability of a flood of a certain size. What's the probability? Using historical data, and what they are saying is normally they need about 10 years worth of data to get to be able to point out, a particular size flood and say, well, this particular flood is about a 50% chance that this will happen again based on, historic data we have. On the other hand, a 100-year flood that has a 1% annual chance of occurring based on the historic data. And so on and so forth. Yes, sir.
That Ellicott City flood they said it was a 100-year flood. It happened twice, like one after the other.
Another point.
Yeah.
It's not something that will, you can have a 100-year flood, twice in a year. Right, this is the probability of the flood at least happening once every year. Right. But it's also important for folks to understand, it's not just the probability, but it's the magnitude, the area that it will cover, how much water, the discharge that communities will experience, the force. Okay, and before I leave this slide, what I wanted to point out, which is one of the limitations in trying to communicate and talk about flooding. In the last couple of slides, we talked about how dynamic flooding can be in terms of causes, in terms of where it can happen, basements or not. But another limitation is that our federal system has decided through Congress to place resources to mitigate this size flood, the 100-year flood. And one of the challenges is that, as you all know, we experience flooding that may not be that 100-year flood more frequently. And so one of the challenges is mapping those areas, getting resources to address those size flood events. And this just reiterates a lot of what I was talking about. Probably this is the occurrence interval, or this is the occurrence interval, and this is the annual chance per year for the 100 years. It's the probability of 1 in 100 chance. So, what actions can we take? We got through the doom and gloom. Everyone's sufficiently quiet. All right. What can we do? Well, in the district, we have proposed new regulations. Because we know one of the limitations of the FEMA mapping is that it doesn't really take into account climate data. Also, stormwater attenuation. What the storm drains will do when water is able to get into those systems, the modeling doesn't account for that. And so what we're seeing in some of the future projections is that in some cases, the 500-year floodplain looks more like what the map 100-year area is. And so in understanding that, we sought to expand our regulated area where we are enforcing design standards for new construction or substantial improvements of residential and non-residential structures. And that we hope will increase the resilience of structures throughout the district. And this is just in the 100 and 500 year areas thus far. We still have those areas of little smaller floodplain areas that are tied to rivers or coastal areas. And I'll talk about them. We're doing our outreach, focused engagement in communities most vulnerable to high risk flooding. We do a lot of partnerships, and we'll get into that later. I mean, Jamani and Nature Forward is an example of the type of partnerships that we look to create, so that when we go into communities, we have a trusted partner that can help direct us in terms of where we need to be, right? There are federal partners, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, local partners, Homeland Security and Emergency Management. There are studies that we have to better understand the problem in some of these communities. The mayor of Washington, D.C. Required a task force to come together with various agencies to tackle the flooding problem, to go beyond just that 100 or 500 year flood risk, and to start to look at some of these areas where we know pluvial flooding is prevalent. And from that, and even previous to that, we were already working on mapping some of these areas and potentially doing more behind the mapping. So you all, your homework, the actions you can take now is to make sure you have some alert system, right? Not just, the alert system that you get, when you wake up in the morning and you turn the weather report on, the news on, and you check the weather and see if it's going to rain, but we have cell phones. There should be some app on your phone, right? And now in the Washington, D.C. area, we have Alert DC that residents can download on their cell phone. Make it a plan. I mean, it doesn't have to be very intricate, but think through where would we go? Where are your resources? If I can't get to my kitchen, if I can't get downstairs, do I have, some supplies upstairs? Right? Think these things through. Flood insurance is available. Definitely.
Is that app only for the DC area or includes all the metropolitan area, Maryland, Virginia?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure, but you can try it, right? Try to download the Alert DC app. Yeah. Flood insurance is available for whether you're renting or buying. It's not tied to your homeowner's insurance. I thought it was at one point, learned otherwise. It's a separate policy.
I don't know if we get funding.
Well, flood insurance, it's actually a federal, it's actually backed by the federal government through the National Flood Insurance Program. And private insurers actually write the policies. So it's available whether you live in a flood zone or not yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, check it out. Look at your house, look around your home. Look at the drainage outside. How is the soil around your house sloped? Does it slope toward or away from your home? There are rain barrels that can help out with the drainage around your house. Look at the lower levels of your home, utilities, mechanical equipment. If you know that your basement has flooded before, there's some things that you want to plan for and invest in. Now, just to switch mode for a second. Anyone, what does equity mean to you? I know this is a hard switch, but we're talking about flood risk. And little did I know when I started this, there is an equity component to flooding. At once upon a time, unfortunately, our government was involved in some inequitable planning practices, where African Americans and others were placed in low-lying areas all across the country. Well, where does water go? It goes to these lower areas. And so by default, you know, some of these areas are flood prone and they happen to be, you know, places where African Americans and others, you know, are. So there is an equity component, but what does it mean to you? Yes, sir.
Fairness level between you.
Okay. President Biden in 2021 required federal government facilities, agencies to start looking at equity in decision making. This is the also in 2021, the Association of Stormwater and Floodplain Management adopted its first social equity policy. This is in the flood world. Washington, D.C., also 2021, it's a pretty significant year for flood policy. D.C. Office of Racial Equity was created. It requires district agencies to apply racial equity to policy making. In the district Department of the Environment, in DOE, we have an equity framework. Okay. In the equity framework, there's some definition. Because I may be an African American, but I'm the same guy who stepped out on that basketball court and passed judgment on someone else, right? I'm not perfect, right? We have some of these preconceived notions, right? And so one way that our agency tries to, you know, move aside bias and preconceived notions is by putting together this equity framework. So us as a diverse staff have a place that sort of puts us, you know, it starts us from the same point, right? And in this framework, we're defining equity. A lot here, but I want to point out it refers to fair treatment, because the access, opportunity, advancement for all people. It connects racial equity and environmental justice. Racial equity is both a process, we should remember that word, and an outcome. Environmental justice, fair treatment, meaningful involvement of all people regardless. Fair treatment means no group of people should bear disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences. We looked at process here, meaningful involvement, disproportionate, right? Think about those things. At DOE, what do we know about the disproportionate or the distribution of flood risk in Washington, D.C.? Well, in our internal sort of investigation, we found that the majority of the residential structures in the 100-year floodplain Y'all can flood anywhere, but remember the federal government decided to focus on the 100-year floodplain. It is a high hazard area. Most of these residential structures are in Ward 6, 7, and 8. Predominantly in Ward 7. So this is the one here. 80%. And if you're unfamiliar about, distribution of races and all that in Washington, D.C., these are predominantly African American communities. 44% of these residential structures are row homes. When it comes to trying to mitigate that type of structure, it's very difficult to elevate a row home when it's connected to other homes. It's not like when we go to Rehoboth and you drive around and you can see that homes have been elevated to prepare for flooding. It's difficult to do that in urban setting. How is this informing our outreach? Well, we know where we need to be. Almost 93% of the high-risk areas or residential units in the high-risk areas are Ward 7 and 8. Came up with an outreach strategy, just trying to move along here. Kind of broke it down a little more by single member districts, those are political districts in DC, by neighborhoods. We did some investigation in terms of languages spoken. It happens that the predominant language is English. This is our preparation for outreach, so that we know we're close to where we need to be. Yes, ma'am.
The focus area 1, is that Ross Branch?
Yes, ma'am.
And which tributary is focus area 2?
Yeah, sorry. FEMA has traditional messaging related to knowing the risk, knowing your role, taking action. We spoke about some of those already. Knowing your role relates more to us helping you understand government processes and how to access them. That gets back to the equity definitions about the process. Some of the materials that we use, we have PowerPoints going over the basics of flooding, flood risk 101, insurance 101. We send out mailers to every residential and commercial structure that is in these high-risk areas every year, right? What I want to get to is our sustained engagement. We consider the rest of this sort of baseline. Direct mailers, attending pop-up events, tabling, speaking to elected officials. But how do we get people to continue the message after we've left? Partnerships, sustained engagement. Okay. We'll share the lessons at the end, but I want you to think about some lessons that you have regarding sustained engagement and outreach. Share with me. Yeah. Now, one of the ways that engagement is by opening up our decision-making process for our updated regulations. What we found is that for this substantial improvement provision that would require a homeowner to elevate their home in a row home situation, that would require some residents to have to fill in their basement. This would have although it would increase your flood protection, it probably is likely going to decrease potentially your home value. And in these historically African-American communities, this is something that could potentially impact generational wealth. So we wanted to take a balanced approach. Here, what we're doing is placing a cap on, where maybe I should call it a threshold, where you have to spend over $200,000 in order for that to be triggered. Going to our partnerships, See Nation Forward, the parks were in the Community Enrichment Center, Anacostia Parks and Community Collaborative, After School All Stars. These are just some of the organizations that we work with that carry our message. Here's an example of sort of the product of some of our work, where instead of going out into a community and not having any partners, we sit down with the partners and we ask them like, okay, how can we use our resources to further your work? And one of our partners wanted to have a set of kids make t-shirts based on what they learned from floodplain management or from flood risk. And I like this one here. The students came up with you can hardly see it, but the students came up with a cool little tag called Drip Drop Awareness. I thought it was kind of cool. But also another one of the suggestions from our community partners, you can see here, community emergency response trainings. So we supported that with our stipends. Again, these are our ideas. This is us sitting down with the community partners and saying, what can we come up with together and how can we get behind what you want to do, right? Here's Jamani, just go back real quick, canvassing in Ward 8, Oxen Run.
Interesting thing.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's fun.
The ambassador program, Ward 8 water watchers. And this is us coming to Nation Forward saying, okay, it's not, you know what we're about, but in terms of how to reach people, it's not us, like, what can we do together? This is that meaningful engagement, right? We partnered with the Academy of Construction and Design, Dennis Chestnut. There's some wonderful students out of Phelps High School who are on a career track to get into the trades. And so we decided to support that effort by folding in some information about flood design. So there are ways that you can retrofit buildings to make them more flood resilient. Let's incorporate that into what the students are learning, right? These are some examples of us being out in the field doing some surveying. It's another component of floodplain management. And we have time later. Let's show Jamali, can you click on the first after school all stars? This is a video from our experience with the after school all stars. One of the coordinators for the after school all stars, Dominique Home, she's the person speaking. And these children are from Hart Middle School. And so I just want to share this with you. So with that, I want to thank you for sharing this evening with me, and I hope something that I said was valuable to you, and that we meet again sometime in the future. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll give a short time. Okay.
No,
Yes.
you're good.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, I was making my Well, actually, got you.
I'm curious, you said about, filling in the basements.
Yeah.
The basements don't flood, but the water is gonna have to go somewhere.
Right.
So does that make the main level more susceptible potentially, or
So it's a good question.
their
So
neighbors?
I gave a sort of a general, explanation for that particular, technique. So in filling in the basement, you may end up filling it up to, let's say, grade, but you still have projected flooding that may amount to about 2 feet above grade. In that case, you can add some flood vents that allow the water to come into the space, but again, you would be losing about 2 feet of your first floor. So you would be elevating your first floor, and you would be creating sort of like a crawl space, like almost like FEMA looks at it as an enclosure. So not only might you be losing, the basement as livable space, but possibly a few feet on your first floor, depending on what the expected flood elevation is for that area. If it's expected to be 2 or 3 feet, and, you have these design requirements that you have to comply with, I mean, not only are you gonna have to fill in your basement, but you may have to come up a few feet on your first floor. And if your square footage is, pretty small already, you've increased your protection, but, at the end of the day, we're working, we're taking care of our families. And in the back of this person's mind, they're thinking about their home value, right? Yes. Good question. Did that get to it?
Yeah,
You have a follow-up?
so are they required?
So that requirement is triggered when there is what's called a substantial improvement. So Joe Schmo, Jane Doe, homeowner, wants to renovate their home. And this is a federal requirement for that 100-year area. So it's not DC that applied that, but it is a federal requirement for these high-risk flood areas. Joe Schmo, homeowner, wants to do significant renovation that exceeds 50% of the value of the home, which is the threshold. It gets triggered. And so as we look to expand to the 500, even instead of applying that same requirement in the 500-year area, we added like that 200, you have to spend at least $200,000 for that even to kick in.
Thank you.
So I had you, sir, man in the orange, and then, okay.
Thanks, Victor. I'd love to get your thoughts on maybe the district dogs, flooding as an example. Your thoughts on, I guess, the feasibility of, are there any amounts of flood attenuation, stormwater management, impervious removal that can solve those problems, given the level of inundation and the magnitude of these events that are occurring?
That's a great question. And that's the type of sort of scenario that district agencies are grappling with right now. You have a very large Northeast Tunnel project that is expected to provide some relief. You're talking about stormwater management. A lot of the stormwater management designs are designed to 15 and 20-year storms. If you get a storm event that exceeds that, then, right? So the design requirements for stormwater management don't always, convert to flood mitigation, depending on the size of the flood. So I don't think there's a simple answer to that, and certainly not an answer that I can give you. right now. But I do believe at the very least would be a suite of sort of different, solutions. And not to mention, that is a very, if you go that 600 block of Rhode Island Avenue, I mean, it's a fishbone, it's a very sort of deep or steep incline going under that underpass there, if you've ever been there, in Northeast DC. So just the sheer topography is an issue, right? Yes, ma'am, and then, okay, yes,
I'm
ma'am.
not sure if this fits the conversation, but there's a program, DC has, is it River Smart?
Yeah. Yeah,
Is that open to any homeowner in DC?
I'm not exactly sure about the requirements, or the criteria for getting into the River Smart, Smart Homes program. I know it's a very popular program.
But it's not, it helps, I think it addresses maybe water runoff, I don't know, maybe not from flooding, but just from, grading issues, the grading, the lack of grading in the area.
Right.
Um,
So from that aspect, yes, I mean, it is a program to assist, homeowners. And I believe there's an aspect of it that even will assist businesses in managing stormwater runoff.
okay, so they'll do an assessment to see, an assessment for you to determine.
You can,
what your needs to be.
you can apply and then they'll also come through with an assessment.
Mhm.
There's quite a few homes, I know in, Ward 4 that if you, also like other places, if you see, they'll have like a River Smart kind of logo on it and you can see where they put strategically impervious surfaces and everything to help mitigate that, in certain design aspects, but a lot of people have rain gardens or rain barrels to, help mitigate that too. And, yeah.
They help us.
It does help. When we, where we've had some of our programming also at the well, we also have rain barrels there and everything. It's a lot of flooding and we're right next to the creek, so there's a lot of flooding, but it also is really helpful for the farms as well.
Because the reason I asked, and I do get a water runoff, and
Mhm.
it gets pretty, no reaches to the property. But it's, if it's a heavy rain, I get the water, and I've been looking at getting a contractor to come out and do some stuff to. Some type of drain or a trap or something they want to put in the ground to catch the river and pipe it out.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm just trying to think forward, and
You
that's
live in
why I'm
DC?
here. I live in DC and not too far from Rhode Island, but I haven't been.
Okay, why don't you leave me your contact information? I work in the same sort of, I do floodplain management, but I work in arm's distance.
Okay.
People that can give you some good information about, the program, so we can get that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my question kind of builds on that gentleman's there. You mentioned regulation updates, but they were all based on the 105 floodplain.
Yeah.
And then the issues with interior flooding. Are there any plans to update the stormwater conditions and particularly for their baseline storm to do a higher involved to help address the interior flooding?
But with the stormwater regulations, I'm not sure. I mean, if you have the Clean Water Act and NIMD's National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, that kind of holds up a lot of the stormwater regulations across the country. And it is sort of focused on water quality, right? Whereas the flooding, you have the Federal Emergency Management Agency and their minimum requirements around flooding that is really the basis of science is, volume. And so there's sort of two different things. And so, as far as stormwater requirements being updated to address, the magnitude of flooding that we're seeing, I'm not exactly sure about that. But on the floodplain side of things, where we do have floodplain management program, we are looking at mapping some of these areas that are being flooded. It's not associated with being in the tidal area or coastal area rather, or near a river, but this is Bluefield. Looking at mapping those areas and, you know, we could see someday there being some regulations behind development. Maybe some of the disclosure requirements, a lot of different things, which I'm sure we'll have, open conversations about, but yeah. I think it was. Then, yeah,
Is there any funding for that? No, the RA.
funding to get the basement filled in.
Yeah.
There are federal, mitigation grant programs. That based on, I guess, the cost benefit, you know, sort of the return on the federal dollar to, protect that house and, you know, how much protection is there once the money is put in. That whole sort of analysis kind of dictates the significant factor in how those federal dollars are applied. So the short answer is yes. But just to take that thought a step further, you know that there are mitigation programs to, you know, help fill in those basements or elevate homes. In case of a row home, the default would be to fill in the basement. But the next thought would be, is there funding available for a person to get that livable space back and build up, maybe? So you lose the basement. And you go, yeah, and so those are things like, I know the city of New York, Boston, other jurisdictions are grappling with that, you know, because they have, you know, this high density of row homes in these high-risk flood areas. So when I think of the federal funding for the row homes, I know we can go and get the basement filled in, but I'm also thinking about the homeowner. Geez, how can we get them that space back, right? Michelle?
Yes. Any more questions?
One, two. Yeah.
There's a lot. We know that climate change is happening and it's gonna be a lot more intense rainfall and stuff like that. Would that mean that they will have to change the mapping and say, well, this is where the 15-year flood used to be, but now it's way up higher. And so there's more likely to be more damage. What's being done to address that?
Well, in DC, we have partnered, again, that's that word, you know, we like to use, with the Army Corps of Engineers to do some future projections, particularly in the Watts Branch area, where we've been able to see, and this is the basis of the regulatory update, part of the basis of the regulatory update that I told you about, where we could see that the 100-year floodplain in some areas really looks like more like the 500-year, which covers a larger area. So although federally, you know, from the federal perspective, the modeling does not traditionally include future rainfall projections. It's more historic data. Locally in Washington, D.C., we are looking at those future, we are doing modeling through our partners to incorporate future rainfall projections. And so and so with that, it's informing how we want to regulate in the future. Check it to your.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I can answer that question. Is FEMA actively mapping systematically the 500 floodplain? Because, yeah, I know city shows, these storms are occurring much more common, and we might be able to take a more different approach to, you know, where, you know, what floodplain areas are regulated to that extent, but this beyond the floodplain for building construction and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so FEMA maps, as they're sort of generically called, those are flood insurance rate maps. Communities that seek to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, one of the benefits these communities get, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Austin, Texas, Philadelphia, these communities will get flood maps. And on those maps, there is the 100-year floodplain and 500-year floodplain. Now, communities can also work with FEMA to have other flood areas mapped on that federally published flood map based on the community's needs. But the answer to your question is yes, the 100 and 500-year floodplain are mapped on the current FEMA maps for Washington, D.C. and many other jurisdictions. And we use that to kind of, look at, maybe where we should be regulated in the future as I pointed out. Yes, ma'am.
Is the city consider at all like purchasing some of the homes in like the worst areas for these folks so that, like you mentioned, they're losing the value of the home as well? Is that?
That's a touchy. Remember how when I started, it was like, yeah, we might get into, some conversations and throw some ideas out there. Someone else might hear that and say, buy my home. And, because there's a lot of history in this country regarding government actions and acquisitions. And so that particular idea, in some instances, because it's personal choice, in some instances might be great. But in general conversation, is really a delicate balance. The option is there because FEMA has an acquisition program where dollars are available. But, for any jurisdiction to sort of, lead with that, I think I'm uncomfortable talking about it.
Right.
And if I lived there, there's so much history. I talked to a gentleman who lives in this area, and he was talking about how he's been in the house for 70 years, and it was his parents' house who lived in that home, right? And so you think about your own home and the attachment that you have to, right? Just complicated, but it comes up a lot, so I appreciate the comment, the question. Right. Yes.
In your experience working with lower income communities in flooding zones, what have you seen are particularly devastating impacts to those communities? Even though flooding is devastating to all of us, are there compounding issues that you see in your experience?
Yeah, in my experience, I'm glad you said that because I'm not a sociologist, right? I don't study social impacts for a living. So I just want to qualify that by my personal experience, and what I've seen is more of an emotional impact. It's like, oh my goodness, so in 2018 in Baltimore and Frederick Avenue, I saw firsthand a community grappling with the result of a flood, major flood, maybe about 6 feet of water above ground, row home communities. And it was a very resilient community. It's still a church in the center of the community that kind of brought everybody together. But the emotional impact is what you see first, right? And the emotional impact sort of like the mental, which I saw less of in this particular situation because the people were so ready and strong. And just coming together. As far as the mental, it was, from my perspective, it was, what's the next step? How do we handle this? But the emotional was there. But then the other part, obviously, as I continued to engage with the community, it was the economic piece. Now, on top of the kids, I'm a new father, always thinking about daycare, and all this. So now on top of these stressors, now I have to, clean out my basement. And if I don't, it is going to create a health hazard in my home. So there's the urgency that is pushing that economic stress, which you may be unprepared for. And so it is definitely complex. And it goes without saying, there are certain individuals who are more prepared than others, and there are certainly some communities that are less prepared than others. And so it's something that I don't have an answer for, but I feel good and confident in the fact that I'm aware. And I think that's a place that it's good to start. Thanks for that question.
I wanted to include a comment from Annette online. She said she has definitely utilized stormwater management. Though in a 500-year floodplain, I have flat land immediately around me. I have a green roof, a rain garden, and a giant rain barrel, all supported in small or large part through DC.
Great.
And I'll share some information with you.
And thank you, guys.
Well, again, thank you all so much for being here and engaging in this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Victor, for taking the time. With all of our speakers, we're so happy to get you with a 3-year of membership with Nature Forward. And all of you, just make sure you can reach out to me if you have any more questions or if you need any more resources as it relates to flood management. Some of the outreach and engagement programs, if you'd like to volunteer, we'd love to have you, especially in DC. So please let me know anything about that. Enjoy the rest of the refreshments, take some bagels home with you for breakfast in the morning. And have a beautiful night. Thank you so much.